Welcome to the Equity Plus podcast from CareShare Health Alliance. I'm your host, Erin Story, Director of Communications here at CareShare. In this episode, we'll hear a conversation facilitated by our Executive Director, Wailing White, about what it's like to be the only one in the room as a Black man in public health and healthcare. We're excited to tackle this topic with our guest, Brandon Allison, a licensed mental health counselor, Cornell P. Wright, owner of Right Way Equity Solutions, and Omari Richens, Program Officer for Health Improvement in North Carolina at the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust. So let's get started.
My name is Wailing White. I'm the Executive Director for CareShare Health Alliance, and I'm very delighted to have three delightful, intelligent, remarkable young men here. I know all of them in their respective professional and personal roles. And so we are very, very lucky to have them, and I'm very excited for the conversation that we're going to have today. So before we get into the discussion and a few questions that I have for you all, definitely want to get into some introductions. Cornell, do you want to kick it off and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Cornell Wright. I am a professional health equity and justice equity and diversity and inclusion subject matter expert, TED Talk speaker, and father, husband, as well as a board member at CareShare. So glad to be here.
Thank you, Cornell. Omari?
Good day, everyone. Omari Richens here. And a lot of my life mission is working towards empowering Black communities. In how I'm doing that currently, I work at the Kate B. Reynolds Charitable Trust as a program officer, where we have the mission to improve the quality of life for financially disadvantaged North Carolinians. I also have a platform called the Public Health Millennial, where I'm the CEO, and that platform is really focused on leveraging the information out there to help public health people learn, navigate, and transform their public health careers. And the last hat that I will cover is that I am the co-founder of a newly founded nonprofit called Black Men in Public Health, where we're trying to increase the amount of Black men in public health and the impact that Black men have on their communities.
Thank you for having me. My name is Brandon Allison. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor here in the state of North Carolina, and also currently serve in the role of clinical director here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have over 13 years of mental health experience, and that's pretty much my background. I've worked in several sectors of mental health, including at-risk youth and the juvenile justice population, and kind of matriculated my way through and working in the healthcare system myself. So I've had an opportunity to see the presence of us and people of color in these rooms, and also the absence of such. And so it definitely fueled my passion to work. I work for everyone with the hope of improving, everyone's mental health, but I definitely have a passion and a zeal for African Americans and those in our community who are most often overlooked or overdiagnosed or underserved when it comes to mental health and the challenges that we face in our community. So a very big proponent of us getting into these rooms, whether it's what we're dealing with in our professional circles or our personal circles, because we carry all of that with us. So big proponent of that, and glad to be a part of this conversation in this room with you gentlemen.
Thank you. And for anybody tuning in, as you hear those intros, this is exactly why we have these men around this panel, because their expertise is very vast in a specific topic. And as you can see with their experience, this is going to lead to some very good conversation that I'm very excited about today. So first thing I wanted to ask you all is, myself being a Black man in a professional setting, have experienced many times, of course, being the only one in the room, but in your perspective roles and in some of your experiences, we hear about the discrimination, the microaggressions, and other factors that contribute to what's known as white supremacy culture, or some others will refer to as white dominant culture, particularly in the workplace when there is few people of color. What are some ways that you have coped or navigated these spaces in your current or past roles, or in your personal lives? What are some ways that you've looked to combat that?
I can jump out there and speak to that one. The big piece for me was, honestly, I think some humility in terms of accepting the fact that a lot of these rooms just don't have a lot of us in them. And I think that was huge for me, to be accepting of that versus wanting to I guess, sort of push the envelope because I was bothered by not seeing a lot of camaraderie or like-minded individuals or same people with the same skin tone as me. So I think a part of it was being accepting of, okay, you need to know what type of water you're actually in. Like I needed to know exactly what type of water it was in. So to be honest with you, I put a lot of emphasis on being an observer, and I became a really, really good listener. I wanted to be in the room and kind of have an understanding of how these rooms operate. How do they navigate if I'm going to be the representative? I never wanted to look at myself as a token, but I did want to look at myself as a representative of our culture. And I wanted to know, now that I was a young professional at 23, what do you think about me? Because I started to get the vibe that at some point it will show itself. It will start to kind of level out in terms of thoughts, beliefs, values, and what those systems meant for me to now be a part of it. And so I became a really good listener in order to understand, how do you need to operate in this space? What type of space is actually carved out for you, and what does that mean for you to be a part of it? So I think I really tried to hone in on being someone who was learning about these systems that were in place. As I grew, then I think I became more focused, which we may talk about more, on how to challenge some of those systems. But I spent the earlier part of my career trying to understand, what is this system that I've heard about with people who don't look like me?
Yeah, I'll piggyback off that. I think for me, I think that's spot on, right? But for me, I had to come up through the ranks, being in a profession where I didn't hold the degree, but was doing it by experience and by the work, and taking a different angle. So being in public health, but coming from a policy angle, it put me in different spaces, put me in different places. Usually was one of the youngest people at organizations, usually the only male in the organization. If you know anything about public health, it's not a lot of males, period, in public health. Probably mental health, it may be similar, I'm betting. But for me, so I'm youngest, I'm one of few men, period. And then you start looking at like how I identify as a Black man that also has American Indian heritage. It's like starting to slim down even more. So I had to, what they say, started from the bottom. I started from the bottom. I'm talking about as an AmeriCorps fellow who didn't even have a dedicated office. They put me in a laptop next to a printer. So I'm like in the common area. So I had to work to even get an office. And then as I rose up through the ranks, like you were saying, like that observation of like, and I think I was spoiled a little bit because I worked exclusively with a lot of people of color. And then I transitioned to a more corporate setting in public health where it was more representation of everybody. And so I had to learn in the different spaces how to maneuver. And so I took a lot of that with me. And even there's a story I think I've shared with Waylon before, that I remember being in a room, being the only person of color at a pretty much like a senior level, and saying something, a response to something, like I was saying, this group is pretty much hustling backwards. And our boss at the time was looking, he just kept looking at me. And you know how you look down and you look back up and somebody's still staring at you? So I looked back at him, he was like, Cornell, this hustling backwards thing, what does that mean? And I was like, oh, it's when you compete against your own self-interest, right? And then like everybody else in the room was like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So it's even like stuff you say in your just normal speaking tones or voices that you sometimes have to remember where you are and just kind of take a step back. And I know some people will say, well, that's code switching. It's like, well, sometimes people are going to need to hear it a certain way for them to get it. So, you don't want to lose people in your message. So sometimes you got to bring them along in the way that they understand. But I had to learn that along the way in this journey.
I would definitely agree with everything that both of you all just said. And just to add to it, I think the accepting it part is also part of like just being mindful of it and being able to sit there and as both Cornell and Brandon shared, just observe and see how things are operating. And I think many times when we are in these spaces, one of the things that we can do is try to find like-minded people, try to find community somewhere so that we're not just holding on to these things that we might think may be racist, or they might be racist, or they are blatantly racist, but we can't just hold on to that by ourselves. We need to find like-minded people to really be there, and we can share our experiences with them. And that way we're all holding the burden of that, and we can all come together to find solutions towards that. But I think like accepting that it is going to be the case many times, being mindful of it, and then finding like-minded people that can help you and just create that community as you grow in your roles as a Black professional.
A lot of what you all are saying are leading me into my next question, because I'm thinking, okay, you're acknowledging it. And of course, when you're in a professional space, I feel like not only searching for that community, but I feel like we all are searching for that brave space, like that safe space you can have, whether it's, just our office or somewhere to eat lunch or something like that. Because the thing about it is that I know for a lot of times with me, there was the dilemma of, okay, am I being authentic? Am I being true to myself? Am I being true to my culture? And was that situation, was I being tokenized, or did I speak up for myself? I feel like there's a lot of things that we carry unknowingly when we are in these spaces, just for our own protection and just to be able to navigate. So with all of that weighing on us daily, particularly, Brandon, if you want to go first, how does this affect the mental health and the mental state for people of color in these spaces?
Oh my goodness, man. I wish I could probably do a whole segment on that by itself. Something you touched on, to be honest with you. And I feel very confident in saying this, especially in my 20s. We're not being our authentic selves because we're not raised or socialized that that's how we can be. My mom probably won't see this, so I can say this about her. My mom's voice changed when she got on the phone to talk to school.
Mine too.
If she was calling, something about a bill, I was like, whose voice is this? But that's that code switch that let me up it a notch or turn it on in a different way that's more acceptable, that's more, let me show you that I know how to speak a certain way or use certain dialect. And I think when we're in professional spaces, that's, almost innate, I think, within us, not because we're not naturally gifted, intelligent, or smart individuals, but because I don't know what you think about me. So I'm going to go to the highest level to kind of walk this line of being accepted and to be a part of the group or to be a part of the norm, regardless of what you think. And what used to be so bothersome to me is that people will still treat you whatever way they want to. Whether they're cool with you or you're the okay guy, if there's a disdain for you, that's going to exist no matter what you prepare, no matter what degrees you have. So I wanted to put that on the front end, but that's impactful to our mental health because I now am masking and I have to wear this mask every day. Every day worried about what's being said about my professionalism, what's being said about my work ethic, what's being said about me arriving on time, my conduct, my dress. I can say something in a way that could be offensive. Another person that's not Black and not a male could say the same piece of information and get away with it. I may be called into the office for a conversation. And that's where the observation piece comes in because I need to know that that can happen. And because I know that that can happen, if I do it, we govern ourselves differently. We may not eat certain things at lunch. We may not have a drink with someone, even if it's offered. I remember being in certain spaces hungry and saying, no, I'm okay. I'm good on that. I'll pass, I'll wait, I'll grab something later just because I don't feel comfortable in this space. These spaces aren't designed for us. So that absolutely impacts your mental health because if you can't be you, that means you're exuding more energy to be something other than you. And that's tiresome, it's worrisome, and it can become very, very heavy professionally and personally. And the challenge is that our bodies doesn't know how to delineate the difference. So that version of you that's exhausted at work, you come home to your family because you pretended all day. And then the one space where you finally get to let down or relax, now you're not the best version of yourself there either.
And that plays into the conversation around the emotional tax, or what some people call the Black tax. And just to define that is the heightened experience of being treated differently from peers due to race or ethnicity or gender, triggering adverse effects on health and feelings of isolation and making it difficult to thrive at work. And kind of on the same thread of what Brandon was sharing, it's like we perceive the world in a certain way since we're a very young age, and we are socialized to act a certain way. And that's why this code switching comes up about, especially as we become professionals and become employed. And I think like a tangible way to kind of explain it to someone who just mightn't understand it is like, let's say you're an orange, the fruit. and your whole family is an orange, your whole community is an orange. But then when you go to work, you're an apple, and you have to act like an apple, you have to talk like an apple, you have to dress like an apple. And then if it's on a lighter case, you might just be like a purple orange. So you don't have to change a lot, but you do still have to change in little bits and pieces of yourself. And the point here is, like, whenever someone can show up as their authentic self and be themselves and bring themselves to work, this impacts them in so many ways that they don't know and they don't understand. And those things are just internalized. And to Brandon's point, it's like you're showing up as your unauthentic self in work, and that is draining. And then you have to come home and you have to switch back over to your authentic self, but then you don't have the energy. And then you might have had another microaggression when you're going to the gas station or to the supermarket, and all these things just add up and just add to these mental challenges and imposter syndrome and workplace isolation. So there's just so many things that can come out from this.
Definitely. I think I think Brandon kind of hit it home for me when he started talking about the food part. Because especially if you're in a place where we all understand the potluck scene at work, and you're like, yeah, I may be hungry, but I don't know who made what, So, and you just start seeing different things that way, like you just suffer, right, in silence. But I think one thing that it takes me back to is the scientific epigenetic piece of it, of the body releasing cortisol when we're in stressful situations, and then not having enough of the enzyme that breaks it down, and then how that gets stored and then re-released and passed on to offspring genetically. And that puts us in these categories of having chronic health issues and other ailments, and how we start thinking about how racism or these systems of unshared power make us sick, and then make our communities lead in the areas of disparities and inequities in a bad way. And so all that is manifested from what both of you have already shared. And definitely, I guess I'm gonna be the storyteller today, right? I remember being on a plane. I think I was going somewhere for work. We were having a layover in like Houston, and I think I was probably going to APHA. Well, I'm sitting all the way in the back. You know that seat you don't ever want to be in, like right in front of the bathroom. And I always need to be like on the aisle seat because I got, I'm 6'1", I got long legs, right? So this guy from my church, internationally renowned like professor in like the divinity space, cool brother, man. Hadn't seen him in a while, so I saw him as he was going to the bathroom. I was like, yo, I said his name. He was like, what up? Like, we see each other, we embrace, like we're hugging, we laughing. And so he goes back to his seat, and one of the flight attendants comes up to me, and she was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know like if there was a fight going on or something. I'm like, well, two brothers embracing and laughing and just being authentically loud, I guess, was a problem. And people thought it was something bad going on. But it was like, why can't we express ourselves and our authentic selves publicly or at work? And it's because there's so many negative connotations for us just being in the space, being in the room. And, one of the things I used to hear and still hear a lot is, what do you mean by that? No, I said what I said clear as day. You understand what I mean. You just want me to break it down and soften the language for you. And that runs a toll. So I think we all are dealing with this on different ways, different levels. And then we want to also protect the people around us. So like if you have kids, or if you got family members, or if you got people that you work with, or that you coach, or that people or clients or whomever that you pour into, you want to coach them in a certain way that they may or may not have to deal with this. And that's also taxing on us as well. And it adds up, is what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, we need those outlets. We need places to go to talk. We need forums like this to be able to share so people know that they're not alone.
Absolutely agree with that. Absolutely. Love the conversation about the tax, and it's wonderful hearing y'all, like, as each of you was talking like different parts. I was like, man, yep, I experienced that. I took that home. I was tired because of that, and you can physically feel the difference. My staff, my brothers, all the time say, man, you need a vacation. You need to take a break. And even with the small break, you can actually feel the difference physically. So thank y'all for those points. Switching gears just a little bit to education. So we all saw, what happened with the Brown versus Board of Education being overturned. Personally, I've seen where organizations have retracted, backtracked as of recent from promises, or I would say dedication and statements made during the George Floyd era where everybody was pro Black Lives Matter. But since that has died down and a lot of people are very interested in this overturning of the Brown versus Board, what do you all see is the future for people of color that are in these spaces, with the companies starting to revert back to pre-George Floyd era when it comes to policies and thinking more about equity and starting to say, okay, well, we really don't have to value that, so maybe we can go another direction?
I think we got to be really careful, right? The ruling that came down is going to be used as a precedent. If you're already seeing it, I'm seeing some stuff too. They're trying to use something that is meant in one arena to be like a blanket for all arenas. So this ruling was, connected to college admissions and the education space. But you're going to see people use this to justify reneging of sorts on the promises that you stated that came up in that George Floyd kind of awareness. The difference is when all these promises were being made, when the murder of George Floyd happened, we were also in a place where we couldn't go anywhere, right? We were locked down due to COVID. A lot of us had stay in place orders. So you couldn't run from the reality that is what we live. And so people felt guilty. There was fragility. There was so many things going on, emotions that people didn't know how to deal with because they couldn't just run away from it like we normally do. Once we got to a place as a society that we could go back outside, or, as they say, we out here, what happened is we start to forget all those things that were welling up inside of us and saying, man, this is wrong, or we need to do something. And so this is why I'm not a huge proponent of organizations making statements if they don't do anything with those statements. They're just empty promises and empty words, right? I think we, in this case, have to become Missouri, the show me state, right? Show me what you're going to do. Or Jay-Z, show me what you got, right? And so I think what we're seeing is that shift. We are seeing the taking of something that is meant for good and being perverted into a negative connotation, whether it be woke, whether it be DEI, ERG, all these other things. If it's a 3-letter acronym, they probably coming after it. And so we got to be so careful and understand, like, we just can't sit on the side. And it's not just us. It's also people who have power, privilege, and influence to actually speak up and say something, do something, and not just sit on the side. Because what's going to happen is what people are thinking in terms of who it's going to impact, mainly people of color, it's going to get worse, and it's going to impact people beyond just people of color. It's going to impact poor people. It's going to impact women. It's going to impact so many people in a space, and you're not going to be able to stop that snowball effect when you start to realize what's really going on and how negative this can be by, allowing this to happen. So I think we just got to be real careful and real strategic on how we really look at this and how we respond. But to answer a question you may or may not have asked, I also think this is also an opportunity. I went to a historically Black college and university. As we're recording this, it is HBCU week. So I think it is an opportunity for historically Black colleges and universities to really put themselves out there, even though they're underfunded and they need more of a level playing field. They still offer something in these times of uncertainty that is important for us to kind of grasp and hang on to.
That was, I think, educational even for me, just listening to that, Cornell. So I appreciate that. I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different angle just because of the sector that I work in. I wanted to use, you are 1000% correct. I was just talking about this. I believe that there is a pre-pandemic mindset, and I believe there's a post-pandemic mindset. And by one pandemic, I mean in terms of maybe the state of emergency that we were in when this first happened 3 years ago. From an employment standpoint, I encourage a lot of my clients and people that I know and people that I work with, jobs were able to send people home or furlough them just like that. It just happened. And some people didn't have jobs to go back to. I've seen people who identified themselves as main providers in their home be reduced to zero. And what do you tell people whose identity is based on what they can provide financially? What do you tell these individuals? So when I'm talking about this in this space, I encourage people to realize that when we talk about safe spaces, a safe space is one you can actually create and actually have an input or an imprint on shaping and shifting for what you need it to be. If we allow education and mandates and precedents to only dictate to us what's okay, what's allowed, and what's safe, we'll never be okay. We'll never be okay. And so you will always internalize the stress of looking at the impact something like that can have on you as personal. And I encourage individuals to really look. And if these companies and these organizations and these institutions are putting more emphasis on them, I'm encouraging us to do the same thing. Put emphasis on you. You have to put emphasis on what it means to take care of yourself. And if my grandma was still here in a world that she says is in its last turns and in its last days, just because of incidents and thank you, Grandma, rulings and things like that for this types of space that we live in, everything's not going to be beneficial for us. And I would ask and pose the question, when has it ever been? Even with things like affirmative action and things like that, when was it? Why did that have to be instituted? Or going to sports, the Rooney Rule, in terms of having to mandate and tell people you have to interview at least 2 people who are brown, at least 2. Well, what good does the ruling do if I interviewed them, but in my mind, I'm already going to hire this person anyway? I'm just sufficing for mandate purposes. But what does that do to the energy of these individuals who feel overlooked or who feel misplaced? We have to put emphasis and energy on, aside from these rulings and these mandates, am I taking care of myself? Because jobs showed us 3 years ago they can open and close their doors whenever they want to. They can send you home when 3 years before the pandemic, you asked, could you work remote? And they said, no, that's not possible. So these entities and these educational spaces do what they need to do for them. Is it fair? No. But what is fair is you allowing your energy not to be monopolized by what you can't control. And what you can control is taking care of you, putting yourself in the best position you can be to adapt and adjust to these rulings, to these unfair mistreatments that will continue to exist in these spaces.
To follow up on everything that you all just said, because I think this is an important topic to talk about, and I think it's really perspective and how do we view this perspective as a Black population. As Cornell was saying, this is a precedent that is going to be set, and this is probably going to be the first step in many steps against Black people, against people of color, trying to get them out in systemic types of ways. And I think it's important for us as Black people to understand that we have power and we need to come together to collectively show that we have power and that we can decide our own future. And I think a lot about this, especially thinking about Black Lives Matter and just how big of a movement that became, and then it died down. And it's sad to see that it died down because there was so much impact that could have been there if that consistent attack of the system to get real change was just consistent and sustainable. But as the pandemic slowed down and people had life to live, we as Black people didn't find it as important, or we just found other priorities in life and it died down. And I think until we as a community can come together and say, like, this is what we want, let's put our efforts behind there, as well as create the economics and the economies where we don't have to rely on other people to choose our future and create the world that we want. That is when we'll find success. So I think, though this is very disheartening, I think it should light a fire under us to say, this is not okay. And we can't just complain about it. And having these conversations are the first part of it, but it's how do we take these conversations and elevate them to an advocacy level? How do we bring together our voices, our communities to say, like, this is not okay? How do we come together and say, we have power in this situation. Let's use that power to get the decision and the forward momentum that we need in order to get Black and brown people into school, to get Black and brown people healthy and to live their full lives. So I think this is just a start, but we need to continue to have these conversations and continue to be on platforms where we're not only having these conversations, but pushing for broader community impact and advocacy to ensure that these types of things don't happen and that we have a seat at the table and that we demand a seat at the table so that these types of decisions don't happen in the future.
I want to jump back in real quickly. As we were starting the conversation when we got on here, I was letting Waylon know I had just went to go vote in our primary here in Durham. And I think that's another thing that we have to really sink into and just marinate in, right? is the power of being involved in voting. A lot of people at a certain stage were like, oh, my vote doesn't count. It does. It counts so much that they do so much to kind of nullify our votes. So that should give us, a lot of pause to understand like our vote really does count. It really does matter. And it's not just voting for the president of the United States. It's also getting involved in your local elections, your mayor, your city council, all the other decision makers that impact your neighborhood, impact your local taxes, your statewide and your federal. Like it all has a symbiotic relationship. We are connected to the people that get in the office. Those decisions that got overturned only get overturned because people voted for the right people to put those people in power to make those decisions. And so we got to be so mindful and so careful of making sure that we understand who we're voting for and that we actually do go vote.
Just to add one last thing there, because I think that is a very, very important part that Cornell lifted up there. It is, we need to show people that there is power in our voice and we need our votes to count. And it is probably even more important to know what's happening in your local elections and getting involved in your local political scene so that you can actually influence the change that has happened in your community and support the people that are doing the things to benefit your community, and just really be in those spaces and take up those advocacy roles and just share like, hey, this is not what we want, and demand that is different. And until we have a community of people that are coming together to say like, this local politician is for us on this issue, this is why we're going with this, and just having a broad understanding of how that impacts our day-to-day lives, I think is just so important. And to Cornell's point, there have been so many efforts and continue to be efforts to keep the Black vote out of the elections. And we know that is reasons because they're trying to keep our power out of it, but we need to take back our power and understand that we have a voice, and politics is one of the ways that we can share our voices and really raise the issues that we want raised up and that are important to us and our communities.
This topic right here, Cornell, you just put me on to something, because this is a whole separate podcast where we could talk about right here, this particular topic. There's so much power in voting, and also after you vote, staying engaged as well. I've talked to people that'll be like, yeah, I've had people tell me, yeah, I'll put you in there, and if we don't see no change, I can help get you out. I've heard that, and I'm just like, okay, I feel like I'm attacked by a gangster. So I'm like, man. And that passion, even though some of those people, it can get tiresome dealing with people like that. But for the community, being in an elected seat, it's you hear a lot of the complaints, but the people with the solutions don't really come to us and engage us. So it's voting, but then I don't know how many times I tell people, please come to our meetings. Like we are begging for your voice. Yeah, your vote is your voice, but you do have it to voice it and to use it and to hold us accountable. Like we want to be held accountable because we are working for you all. And so I think, that's a really good point that you all had, but also staying engaged, staying in the know, knowing who to vote for, knowing who did what, knowing what they support. If someone is all about the money in your community, they're not doing any social change and they're climbing the political ladder and they're going to the top, that's a huge problem in itself. It's going to affect more people. So all good information. I love what you all are saying. Cornell, you talked about and thank you for highlighting this week being HBCU week. I think I saw you on LinkedIn. I think you had a shirt or something on. I got to go back and like it. I was just scrolling before I came up here. And I know, you're an alum. I'm not going to say the college because I know you will. I'm not even going to do that. How has your educational experiences and how has, the institutions that you all went to, how did they prepare you for being the only one in the room?
So as a two-time alum of the North Carolina Central University, home of the Eagles, HBCU national football champions,
Here we go.
reigning, we are high flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing. Let me get my Ric Flair on. Woo! No, but seriously, and there are other schools, especially here in North Carolina, other historically Black colleges, university schools that do amazing things. And we have these playful banters against each other. But people I know from the Winston-Salem State University are amazing people. People that, went to Bennett or went to Shaw, St. Aug, or went to that other HBCU in Greensboro that's not Bennett. They have amazing programs. They have amazing alumni. They're people that are giving back. One thing that is probably a connection for many of us that went to historically Black colleges and universities is that in some cases it wasn't different from the messages that we got from being in a Black household. If you got to be better, you got to be faster, you got to be smarter, you got to be stronger, you got to be more strategic. And it prepared us to keep our head on a swivel. I know, and that could be part of our trauma bonding in some cases, if we go deep enough to really kind of unearth that. But what I will say, it prepared me to not think that just because I'm smart, that's enough. And it keeps me from just sitting in one place thinking that I've accomplished something and I'm good, but it keeps me hungering for more, to achieve more, to help more people. And so the way we were reared at a Black school has really shaped who I am as a person and as a professional. And then going back, so I'll probably go back this weekend, see some of those people. I speak to some of the administrators. I literally talked to one on Sunday. It was one of my NCCU moms. She was laying into me like, hey, the phone worked both ways and you need to check in on me. Like, it's that kind of love that I don't know if you get that everywhere else, right? And so in my case, those people who were like surrogate parents in the educational matriculation that I went through also connected to my parents and made sure like, hey, you dropping your child off, we got him. And we will check in with you to make sure that you know what he's doing, what he's up to, and I think that's important. And so for me, being able to go to a Black college university really helped shape me to be in these spaces as the only person, because I was empowered and uplifted when I was around people that looked like me to make sure that I did my best and didn't settle for anything less than excellence. And this is one thing I always stress. I used to tell my staff this all the time. We always do things in the spirit of excellence and not perfection. If you do it in the spirit of excellence, we can learn and we can grow. But if you try to do things in the spirit of perfection, we're going to act like we know everything and we're not going to learn and we're just going to be real stagnant with our growth.
I don't have a very cool intro for the Winston-Salem State, which is where I always tell people I'm a two-time HBCU graduate myself, one for the Winston-Salem State University, and I got my graduate degree from North Carolina A&T State University. So I'm very proud of both of those institutions. But when people ask me, I talk about Winston with a love in my heart because it raised me. When I got dropped off, when you said dropped off, that's what triggered. I got dropped off at Winston-Salem State University at the age of 17. I wasn't even 18 yet. I was 17 years old. And the thing that rang out to me, Cornell, as you were talking, and I know Waylene and I have discussed this too, the pride that I have in what was given to me at this school, being surrounded by Blackness, coming from a small town known for its textile mill and things like that. The amount of confidence I think I developed at 17 years old, and the challenge that I was given. I remember, and I know she may not see this, but Miss Dr. Smith was my English 101 professor my freshman year. And I remember she had us read a story. I want to say it was called The Glass Menagerie. That's how embedded this is in my mind. And I owed her a paper on my perspective on The Glass Menagerie and what it was. And I did not do it. Very first assignment, did not do it. And she said, Mr. Allison, why didn't you do my assignment? And I gave her whatever reason. I don't even know if she let me get the reason out. She said, I tell you what, because I'm feeling generous, I believe you were burning the midnight oil, messing with some of these young ladies and not doing my assignment. So I'm going to give you a break, and I want this in my office by 3:30 because that is when my car leaves campus. And if you see me leaving campus, it is too late and you need to find another English teacher. And I said, oh, she's not playing. Like this is Auntie talking to me right now. And it hit different. The reason why it hit, it was like, you're in school. That for me, I think was like, you're in college. There's a purpose in you being here. And it's not to hear the band. It's not to see the cheerleaders that were in front of our dorms welcoming us. Yeah, that's the optics and that's fun. But she let me know right then and there that there's a purpose in you being here and don't think you are owed a seat in my class. just because you are here. It taught me responsibility. It taught me work ethic and being around, same as you, Cornell, people who we can be in these spaces. And it elevated my belief in that I could stand in the room with UNC Chapel Hill. Didn't matter. North Carolina State, didn't matter. Bring them in the room. Bring them in the room. Why not? It taught me that was an element of pride and also an element of significance, that these institutions were built and founded because we didn't have other places to go. And I think knowing the history of these schools and why they were founded gave me a different understanding of education, and that my education was second to none and top notch. And it just gave me that bravado to stand in the room and be proud. When I hand you my resume and it has Winston-Salem State on it, I'm proud of that. And to see a master's degree from A&T, I'm proud of that, because you won't find someone else from another institution, in my mind, that knows what I know the way that I know it and was cut from the cloth that I was cut from by going to the school I went to. You just won't find it. And I was okay with walking around with that bravado when I go into interviews. There's nothing you could say to me or turn your nose up at my institution. And they prepared me to have that confidence, because the people who will be overlooking your resume and your credentials, they're going to have more questions for you than they would another candidate that came from somewhere else. And you need to know that. And here's why.
When it got to the point where I got more seasoned in my jobs and I changed my CV from having my education at the top to being it like under my experience, it totally shifted, right? It's not because I was trying to hide my education. It was because my work was speaking for itself. And to run an office at the state level for over 7 years that they tried to kill, that they tried to destroy, that they tried to get rid of, and God wouldn't let it happen. And it was because of that tenacity. It was because of that resilience. It was because of that empowerment that we learned going to those HBCUs that allowed us to do that work and do it damn well. Oh my gosh, brother, you got me about to run off here and go off camera and run around the house for a second. Because I'm telling you, they start looking at the work and like, oh my gosh, you're only a certain age. You've done all these things. And it was like, and then to me, it's the bow on top when they get down past the experience and say, oh, you went to an HBCU and did all this? Yep, sure damn did. And guess what? We're going to do some more work when you hire me. So I am excited. I'm going to stop talking because I know Mario got to go.
I wanted to, I'm sorry, Mario, because I'm fired up too. Just a quick story, because the crazy thing is, for anybody that's watching, or I mean that's listening, if you went to Winston-Salem State, you know me and Brandon both went to Winston-Salem at the same time. That's where we met, and I never knew that story. But the fascinating part of that is that I have a similar story with another professor. I know Brandon know the professor as soon as I call his name, Jesse Pitsley. I already knew he was gonna make that face, because anybody listening from Winston-Salem that was in that major and his class, y'all already know how he operates. And I never forget, I was a freshman and I was taking my first class or course that was in my major. I was an exercise science major. I wanted to go for physical therapy. He said, "Look around the room. The room was full of people in here. It's, you know, we almost ran out of seats." When I was in college, what I would do, I would take really good notes, and I would get with the smartest girl in the class right before our test. We'll stay up all night. We'll be studying, and we'll help each other out. And then the very next day, I'll ace all my tests. And, you know, I was getting good grades throughout college. And I was like, that sounds like what I plan to do. Like, okay, you know, yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. And he said, and so with that, I designed my class so students just like me will automatically fail. And I was like, what? And everybody was, you know, lost. And he said, absolutely. He said, so the way I weigh my tests is if you fail more than 3 tests, automatically your grade drops so far, you're automatically out. In the first 5 minutes of class, you have to be there at 9 o'clock. You're taking the quiz at 9 o'clock in the morning. You get in there and the quizzes are only 5 questions. So if you get there at 9:10 and you're late, you miss the entire quiz. The quizzes are weighted. And so me and one of my line brothers at the time, we were going through the class, and at the end we said, hey, we're joining a fraternity. We're going to miss the test. He said, hey, I know you all, you all got good grades, but I can't help you out with missing it because this is extracurricular. I got to stay true to how I operate my class. And so we missed it, but it gave me that work ethic so much that I was there on time. It taught me how to get up in the morning. It taught me how I never studied before I got to that class, ever, never. And I took those work ethics with me into my professional life, and he did a rant. If you know Dr. Pitzer, he would have these rants, and true indeed, just like he said, the end of the semester, we looked around, half of the class was still there. He looked at me and my line brother at the time. He said, hey, if these two guys, and Alpha Phi Alpha is not a Hazer fraternity, we did not haze, but if they're here and they just crossed, there's no reason why anybody else with nothing else going on shouldn't pass my class. You have to have that work ethic to get it done. And that stayed with me from that day forward, that I carry everywhere that I go.
So to talk about my experience, and definitely a little envious about hearing about these stories, because as you all hear, I did not attend any HBCUs. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, grew up there until I was 16, lived in the Middle East for 2 years. Then I came to the US to go to school. I went to the University of Tampa, predominantly white institution, or historically white institution, if you want to phrase it that way. And then I got my master's at the University of Florida. The first thing that I would say about like my educational journey is it fundamentally shaped who I am today. And I think I'm just continually learning and growing to show up 100% authentically as myself. Preface the story by saying that I had a privileged life growing up in Trinidad. I was upper middle class, but one of the things that, looking back in hindsight into that, is when I look at my Black counterparts now in the US, is that I was never told that I couldn't be a doctor. I was never told that I couldn't be an engineer. Those things were actually things that people expected of me and of everyone else in my classroom. So my classroom was predominantly Black, but then they had a large percentage of people that were also of East Indian descent. And if you know anything about Trinidad, those are the predominant ethnic backgrounds in Trinidad. But regardless of that, I was never told that I couldn't do anything. And I always had a vision for myself of like doing all these great things in my life. Then fast forward 16 years, going from Trinidad to the Middle East to an international school in Oman. This is really where I started to understand my Blackness and my Caribbeanness, because it wasn't something that I inherently thought about until coming to this place and just having people from all over the world try to understand me trying to understand them. And that was like fundamental in just changing how I viewed the world and my mindset going forward. And then going from that space where I was oftentimes one of few Black people in the room, and the Black people that were in the room oftentimes came from Africa as opposed to coming from America. So different perspectives there as well. But underlying, we were considered Black. People used to call me Blackfish because in their minds, Black people didn't swim. I swim, so they call me Blackfish and things like that. So just like those little things kind of stand out. But then when I got to University of Tampa and looking back on it and listening to Cornell and Wheeling and Brandon's story, is like, I'm envious of the HBCU experience and the life after college. And I think the brotherhood that was really built on that community, because I don't think I have much of that. And it could be because I went to these historically white universities, or it could be just a factor of life. But I think from what I've learned from interacting with many people who went to HBCUs, it probably was because I just was in a space that was not for me, ideally saying. I was one of very few Black people in my biology classes. I was a biology major. And then as you go up the classes, you're one Black man, maybe there are two Black people in there, but you're oftentimes the only Black person in the room. And one thing that I wanted to highlight here is that I actually dropped out of university for a semester off of depression and homesickness. And one of the things that I kind of didn't acknowledge at the time, but I acknowledged afterwards when I was like trying to heal myself, was that I came to the US and I wanted to be so involved in what this culture was at this school, which was very white, is that I didn't even go to the Black Student Association meetings. I didn't go to the Caribbean Student Association meetings. And I think in that, I just lost part of myself and my community, and just feeling like I belonged there and I wasn't a token. Because in many friend groups, that is how I felt at the time. And those things I think were just so important to have that community. And then going to my master's program at the University of Florida, I was also most of the times the only Black male often probably the only Black person in the classroom. And what I really learned from these experiences is that I learned to be in the space. It taught me to be okay with being the only Black person or one of few Black people in the room. I understood that people are going to tokenize me sometimes, and that's not something that I can ideally change. And at the end of the day, I just need to continue to show up as myself. And it's interesting because when I did start to show up as myself in my master's program, that's when all these different leadership opportunities started to come to me. And those were the things that really catapulted my career, because I just showed up as myself, tried to be authentic, didn't try to fit into any box that anyone was trying to put me in. And I think those are important. I think it taught me to show up, but it didn't teach me how to advocate for myself. It didn't teach me to show that my Blackness is of importance. Like, while I was in the room, I don't think I learned the techniques to really navigate being in the room. These were things that I had to teach myself and learn afterwards and really develop with mentors and other people, because it just was very foreign to me. And looking back on my journey now, I always think about like how different would I be able to show up if I did go to an HBCU? How different would my community of people that I'm close to be if I did go to an HBCU? So I just think it's so important to have these spaces for Black people that are teaching Black empowerment, that are teaching Black love and to love yourself, and to not just fall into spaces that are not created ideally for you, because many times they are going to, as we spoke about, like drain you and take away from you and make you feel depressed and make you have all these mental health issues. So I think it's just so important to not only just to show up in the room, but you have to really understand and learn how to navigate and show up authentically as your 100% Black self in these rooms. And I think that's one of the things I wish I was able to learn more of during my schooling career. But thankfully, I was able to have a community and mentors that were able to teach me how to better show up and do these things. And I look forward to my future. And I'm thinking about pursuing a doctoral program. And I always think, like, would it be an HBCU school? Because the experience that I heard, and the brotherhood and the family that I've heard from so many people, just seems like such a rewarding experience, and it just carries with you throughout your entire life. And I think these are the important things in life, and especially when you're taking on an endeavor like schooling, which is that you put in a lot of effort and money and resources into. Being in a place that can really support you, I think, is so important. And I think I will get into this in the next question that you're going to ask, but you really need to find those spaces, whether you're at a HBCU or you're at a historically white institution. Find spaces that were created by people like you, for you, so that you can authentically show up and just learn how to be yourself in those spaces.
Thank you for letting us peeking into the life of Omari and sharing that with us. It's very powerful and definitely a good, I would say, a good contrast to what we've kind of experienced. And I know it's eye-opening for me to actually, hear that and hear their experience. That's something that I haven't really heard a lot before as it pertains to this topic. So thank you for being candid and for sharing that. So we are at the end, and just to end on a note, as you was talking to Omari about, how we move forward and how we advocate and how we can empower the other people that are coming behind us. What advice would you all give young professionals of color that is beginning their career in a space where they're the only one in the room?
And I can start off, since I kind of alluded that I would answer the question. I think it's so important, if you're a Black person and you want to make social impact, you want to make impact in your work, that you are not only being interviewed for roles, but you are interviewing the roles and the employers. Because too many times we go into places and then we realize that we can't be our authentic selves. But I think this is a conversation that we need to have before you even apply to an institution. Like, you want to make sure that when they're interviewing you, you are interviewing them, so that when you come into the organization and you do the things that you said you were going to do in the interview, no one's going to bat an eye or feel a certain way about it, but just really being intentional in positioning yourself as, hey, this is what I want to do. Is your organization going to support me in showing up as my authentic self, so that we are really ensuring that we are going into these places and being safe, because we're spending a lot of our time in the work that we're doing. So really ensuring that place is a place that can support you and help you to grow, I think, is so important. And this is something that we need to really be proactive about as we are engaging in looking for jobs.
Totally agree. I think one of the things, well, a couple of things I would definitely jump on the interviewing the organization is important. I actually got a job because of that. I was being interviewed for a role, and I gave the people who were interviewing me homework. What was interesting is that people actually emailed me with their responses to my homework that I gave them. And I think that set me apart. It was based off a question that when I interview people, I usually ask as the last question, depending on the space I'm working in, definitely. But if you're working with communities or different types of people, always ask at the end of the interview, like, why are people poor? And it's not like there's a right or wrong answer, but the mindset of how you answer that question really speaks volumes of what you stand to share, gain, or learn from the people that you work with, not just in the office, but outside of the office. And then what your mindset is working with people who may be labeled a certain way. And then how you respond to that. Another thing I used to say to my staff was, it's not as much about what happens to us as much as it is how we respond to it. And so one of those things in that response is to do two things. I'll say three, and piggybacking off of Mari, be your authentic self. Make sure you engage in self-care, and then also keep receipts, because that part right there, it sounds like it may be stressful, but I promise you it has come to help me in so many situations that, even when you're looking at what they hired you for. I mean, I've had a conversation with a CEO before and said, I just want to make sure that I'm not confused on why you hired me, because we're about to start getting into some difficult conversations. I want to make sure that you're okay, that you hired me to get into these conversations. I don't want to hear any pushback when we start really diving into those uncomfortable conversations. And if we need to pivot, we need to pivot now before we start getting into that. So we also, have to keep those receipts and say, I'm hired for this. Those check-ins, they have to be bi-directional in its purpose. You're learning and they're learning. So if you have one-on-ones with a supervisor, making sure that you're learning, you're getting something out of that experience, and you're not just downloading and dumping what you've done the past week. What are you also getting out of these experiences? And I think that's where, if I was to go back and tell my younger self to do more, is to kind of dive in more into that space in those areas, in those places where I didn't have it as much as I had it when I first started working. So I was very blessed to go into a space and have Dr. John Hatch, who's a public health icon, legend, as a mentor in one of my first jobs. And so learning from him, he poured into all of us so well that when you go to other spaces and you don't get that, you're like, oh, it's lacking. It's like I'm missing the gravy on these mashed potatoes. You know what I'm saying? So, but I think those three things will do a young professional well: just being your authentic self, engaging in self-care, and keeping receipts.
I would say for me, in the spaces that I've been in, where I find it is important is you may not know the impact of your voice, but I would encourage someone to know what your voice sounds like. So when you're in the room, don't be afraid to speak, because again, you may not know what the impact may be by speaking, but you need to know what your voice sounds like so that you get comfortable with what your views are, with what your core beliefs are, and what your values are. Because it matters in a room whether or not people respond. And I think sometimes we talk for a response. I'm not talking for you to respond. I want you to hear what I'm thinking. And to me, I found that being internally validated means more to me than being externally validated. That I got a chance to speak and say something that was important to me. What you do with it when you go home and leave the parking lot is up to you. But I wanted that to be in the room, because if I hit a chord, you'll be the one who is aware of that. So that means my sentiment was accepted in a way that I needed to be, because it sat with you, it resonates, and that may be thought-provoking in moments that I may never see grow or come to fruition, but that's important for me. The other piece is, and I can't take the credit for this, I wish I could, but a colleague of mine shared with me that you don't always get to choose your experiences, but you do get to choose how you experience. And so I think it's important for us to be able to understand that we may not be able to choose the energy that's in the room, but how I experience that energy, how I take in that energy, and how I reciprocate that energy is always up to me. It's a choice. And so I think people need to be very much aware of that. Any environment that you're in work-wise, no matter how many individuals that look like you are in that room, you always have a choice. You always have a choice in terms of how you respond or the type of energy that you give back. And I think that's important to be able to know. I want us in these spaces to be okay with being uncomfortable. And I'll stop here in saying that any instance where you're likely uncomfortable, on the other side of uncomfort is usually growth. And I want people to know that if there's a place of uncomfort, it's usually asking you to grow or to be stretched in a way that you just haven't before. And that's a learning opportunity for you professionally and personally. And we have to be willing to seek those out, even if that means being a little uncomfortable for a little bit.
I just want y'all to know, I hope everybody that's listening is doing the same thing. I'm picking up all these gems that's being dropped throughout this episode. So yeah, thank each and every one of you. This has been an amazing conversation. Learned a lot from you brothers. Hopefully this episode can inspire someone and give them some bravery and some insight when going into being the only one in the room, or going into an organization where they're the only one at the table. So had a lot of fun with you all, and I hope everyone enjoyed this episode of the Equity Plus. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to episode 6 of the Equity Plus podcast. Special thanks again to Cornell, Brandon, and Omari for spending this time with us and so candidly and thoughtfully sharing their experiences. You can find more information about our guests at the Equity Plus podcast website at caresharehealth.org/podcast. And if you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe to hear more from community leaders and community-based organizations in North Carolina about how they're working to advance health equity. To learn more about CareShare Health Alliance, visit us at caresharehealth.org, and don't forget to check out our hub for community-based organizations working to promote health equity and community voice, the Equity Plus Network, at equitypn.org. That is EQUITYPN.org. We can't wait to connect with you there.